Deze man sprak persoonlijk met Margaret Thatcher. Helmut Kohl ontmoette een jonge Vladimir Poetin en stond als journalist en historicus met zijn neus bovenop de politieke omwentelingen in Europa. Timothy Garton Ash schreef over dit boek, Europa, een persoonlijke geschiedenis. En aan de vooravond van de Europese verkiezingen sprak ik hem net voor de uitzending. Mr. Garton Ash, thank you so much for being on our program today.
Great to be with you.
Now, you just got back from Ukraine, I understand, which was heavily bombed again last night. What's the mood like in the country at the moment?
Bad. People are staring to the jaws of a possible defeat. Listen, a city the size of Amsterdam, Kharkiv, is just being pounded. Really terror bombings directed against the civilian population. I was there partly for the Ukrainian edition of my book, Homelands. The printing house where the Ukrainian edition was printed in Kharkiv was destroyed just a few days ago. 7 people killed, many wounded. Just yesterday, a do-it-yourself shop, the kind of place we all go to get stuff for our homes, was hit. At least 11 people killed. This is a real horror. And the lack of air defense from the West, the lack of ammunition, and also the lack of permission to strike into Russian territory. Kharkiv is only 45 kilometers from the Russian frontier. That's really getting people down.
Yeah, so this is the mood in the country. What's the mood in the army like then?
So I actually talked to frontline soldiers. Listen, these guys, by the way, average age 43. They've been fighting continuously for 2 years and 3 months. They're still determined, but really exhausted, really worn down. And the problem, as you know, is that they are not getting enough younger men coming into the army despite having a new conscription law. Actually, wherever I went, I heard stories of how young men were actually dodging the draft. Okay, no taxi drivers because they were afraid of being picked up. Younger members of the editorial staff of a newspaper saying, I want to work from home because I might be picked up, and so on. So it's pretty grim.
I also read that these men are dodging fighting because they say, why should I fight? There's such a shortage of ammunition. So the shortage of ammunition is influencing the morale.
Absolutely. The sense that they're not going to be well enough equipped, and the fact that there is no term to the military service. So actually in Lviv, I came upon a demonstration of young women in front of the city hall demanding a term for the military service, because at the moment there is no term. Once you're in, you could be in for 4 or 5 years. So that's also a big issue. And of course, people also are angry about the young Ukrainian men who are in the Netherlands, in Britain, in France, and Germany, instead of being fighting at home. And that also creates divisions within Ukrainian society. So we need to do more for Ukraine really fast, more air defensives, more ammunition, and allow them to use Western weapons to strike military targets across the Russian frontier.
Well, about that, just recently, Jens Stoltenberg of the NATO has said that he would be for such a thing, that the West should consider the use of weapons on Russian soil. Is this a turning point in the war?
It's not only a turning point in this war for good, it's entirely possible still for Ukraine to win it. But if we go on like this, they're quite likely to lose, particularly if Donald Trump becomes president of the United States on the 5th of November. But it's also a turning point in European history, because one of the points I make in the book is that what I call the post-wall period, the period that started wonderfully with the fall of the Berlin Wall on the 9th of November 1989 and ended definitively with Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. That period is over. So we're at the beginning of a new period of European history. And beginnings in history and politics, as in romance, matter. It matters more what you do now than what we do 10 years down the road. If we allow Ukraine to lose, it won't just be a defeat for Ukraine. It'll be a defeat for Europe, and it'll be a defeat for the credibility of the entire West across the world, in China, in India, in Russia, in Turkey, in South Africa, in Brazil.
Yeah, you start your book at World War II and its history until now. So are we, you say this is a beginning, at the same time, I can't help but feeling, are we back where we started?
Listen, next week I will be on the beaches of Normandy, where my father landed with the first wave on D-Day, 6th of June, 1944, 80 years on. We thought that we in Europe had said goodbye to all that. But in fact, the book starts with one big war. It ends with another big war still going on. Donald Tusk, the Polish prime minister, said we might even be living not in a post-war period, but in a pre-war period. Nobody knows, but what's clear is that what we do now is going to determine the character of the decades to come.
Yeah, and you write about your father who fought at the beaches of Normandy. So he started out fighting for Europe, but you also write he would have voted Brexit had he gotten the chance. Have you, after writing this book, started to understand him a little bit?
I loved him dearly and I understood him. And interestingly enough, he always said to me, for me, it's about democracy. He believed that the true democracy was in the nation state. I'm rather glad in a way that he didn't live to see the Brexit referendum because it would have been very painful in our family. But listen, we are now facing a wave of populism across continental Europe. Interestingly enough, we're ahead of you because we're actually coming out of it with our election on the 4th of July, and we're going to have a much more sensible and pro-European government, that you're facing it in the Netherlands and across the whole of Europe. And what you have to start by doing is understanding where people are coming from. What are their concerns about immigration, about housing, about inequality, yes, about sovereignty, about cultural change, and then address their real concerns. That's what we liberals actually failed to do for many years.
Yeah, and one of the people actually in Europe who seems to be an important figure in this wave of populism is Viktor Orbán, and I understand he's a former student of yours. A staunch anti-communist liberal who's now turned something else. How do you explain that?
So listen, I will never forget this bright-eyed, idealistic-seeming student, Viktor Orbán, who I met first in Budapest in 1988, and then he was our student here at Oxford, telling me how he was going to build a perfect liberal democracy. It's a truly shocking story, Orbán. In his case, the key to understanding this is money and power. That's what he's really interested in. The ideology is secondary. But he's also a really interesting symptom of something very bad happening in Europe, that the prime minister of a full member state of the European Union can have friendly relations with Putin, from whom he gets cheap gas, and welcome Xi Jinping in Budapest just recently with open arms. In other words, you've got a full member state of the EU which has a kind of hedging strategy. I'm going to be good with the US and with Europe, but I'm going to have close relations with Putin and Xi Jinping. If we allow that to continue inside the European Union, that's truly the beginning of the end of the EU.
At the same time, left-wing politicians have this week published a pamphlet in The Guardian saying that they would never work or cooperate with the radical right. Does that make any difference? Is that a good thing to put out?
Listen, I think it's a very good thing, but it doesn't matter as much as what the center-right does. Because the Europe we have today, the European Union, was very much the product of Christian Democrats, of the center-right. And the center-right always had a cordon sanitaire, a clear dividing line from the hard right, nationalist, populist right. And what's really worrying is to see that breaking down in the Netherlands, of course, with VVD, but also beginning to break down in Germany between CDU and AfD, in Spain, and elsewhere in Europe. So I think it's really important that we continue to hold that line, that cordon sanitaire, particularly if the hard-right populists do very well in the European elections, which I'm afraid seems quite likely.
Yeah. We just talked about Brexit briefly. You yourself were an avid Remainer. What did you learn after those years? What did Remain do wrong, in your view?
Well, first of all, it was anything but inevitable. It was only 52% and 48%, and it was a very close-run thing. Secondly, I would go back to what I said a moment ago. You have to address the concerns of the people who, in this case, wanted Brexit. So, for example, David Cameron tried to win the campaign saying, it's the economy, stupid. Classic Liberal position, it's all about the economy. But people were most concerned about immigration, so you have to go and address their concerns. And one of the great challenges for us liberal Europeans, liberal in the broadest sense, is we have to control immigration. We have to manage immigration. The sense that it's out of control is one of the things feeding the flames of populism. But we have to do that in a humane and legal way.
Yeah. And I just want to ask one last question, because your book is it's about all of the history of Europe, but it also emphasizes the role that individuals can play in history, that it's not just all the systems. Why do you do that? Why is that so important to you to emphasize?
Because it depends on us. You know, one of the funny things about being a historian is that you go around Europe and everybody asks you about the future, right? But the future is not something that is written in the stars. There is nothing predetermined about it. It depends on us. And so what I'm really trying to do with this book is to get across, particularly to younger Europeans, that we have the best Europe we've ever had, but it's deeply under threat. It could disappear really quite quickly. And we need to mobilize. We need that individual engagement to defend it.
See, Mr. Garton-Ash, thank you so much.
Pleasure to be with you.
Bedankt voor het kijken. Vond je dit nou een goed gesprek? Vergeet je dan niet te abonneren. Een like of een comment achterlaten kan natuurlijk ook.